At 09:23 hours on June 14, 2025, the guided missile cruiser USS Princeton, CG-59, was conducting a standard freedom of navigation patrol in the South China Sea, the kind of routine presence mission the U.S. Navy had been performing for decades to maintain open international waters. The patrol was unremarkable until her AN/SPY-1 radar system picked up an anomalous contact that would, for a moment, push two superpowers to the brink. At a distance of roughly 200 kilometers, the system detected a Chinese-type 052D destroyer, designated Jianchong, which had been idling at a modest 18 knots. Suddenly, the radar trace shifted. The ship was accelerating rapidly, reaching 30 knots in under 90 seconds. Inside Princeton's Combat Information Center, operators watched the track update with the calm precision of professionals who had seen tension before. Unknown to them, the Chinese captain had just received direct orders from Beijing: intercept the Americans, make them yield. What Beijing failed to grasp was that they were about to test the United States Navy's most polished skill: command of open waters. The USS Nimitz carrier strike group, which Princeton was screening for, represented the apex of maritime dominance, a floating city of American diplomacy backed by lethal precision. Their task was transparent: uphold navigational freedom along sea lanes through which $3.4 trillion in annual trade flowed, keeping commerce alive not just for America, but for the very Chinese factories whose goods depended on those waters. The Nimitz Strike Group, operating some 180 nautical miles from the nearest Chinese-held island, followed standard protocols: clear courses, open transponder signals, and predictable maneuvering, hallmarks of lawful naval professionalism. By 09:26 hours, Princeton's fire control and classification systems had confirmed the contact as a planned type 052D destroyer. Threat level assessed as moderate to high. Inside the dark, red-lit CIC, the tactical action officer studied the data calmly. The radar imagery, sharp enough to distinguish antenna structures on the Chinese ship, was unmistakable. With 122 vertical launch cells loaded with SM-6 and SM-2 missiles, the Princeton could vaporize the approaching destroyer before it ever closed the range. Still, the U.S. Navy's rulebook dictated discipline: watch, verify, report. Do not react first. At 09:29 hours, the Princeton's captain requested a probable intent assessment. The tactical computer projected that, at current speed and heading, the Chinese vessel would reach weapons release range in just under 14 minutes. The logical recommendation? Go to general quarters. Full combat readiness. The captain, seasoned and unflinching, chose composure over alarm. "Let's see how badly they want to embarrass themselves first," he said, voice steady, confident. The operational environment around them added complexity. Within a 50-mile radius, there were 46 civilian vessels, merchant ships, tankers, and container carriers. A Singapore-flagged semiconductor freighter, a South Korean LNG vessel valued at $200 million, all relying on the U.S. Navy's protection to ensure unimpeded passage. Any escalation here risked more than 2 warships. It threatened the arteries of global commerce. Still, the Americans knew the underlying truth. China's intimidation tactics relied on perception, not parity. The last time anyone had bested the U.S. Navy in open waters was, quite simply, never. At 09:30 hours, Princeton's cooperative engagement capability automatically distributed the threat data across the strike group's secure network. The USS Nimitz herself, 100 tons of aviation steel, adjusted flight deck operations with clockwork precision. The destroyers USS Chung-hoon and USS Kidd repositioned to tighten the carrier's defensive formation. The airspace was now under layered surveillance, the sea lanes under the watch of a navy that had made deterrence into an art form. What began as an ordinary patrol was now evolving into a dangerous dance of calculation, distance, and discipline, one in which the smallest misstep could ignite a global catastrophe. By 0935, the tactical picture darkened. An E-2D Hawkeye on station at altitude began to unravel the Chinese plan in real time. Multiple flight tracks rose off the Shandong, profiles consistent with J-15 carrier fighters accelerating southbound. The orbital radar, the fleet's God's eye, painted a broad surveillance bubble, and what it revealed was not subtle posturing, but the opening moves of an air intercept. The signatures of the J-15 launches told analysts more than the mere number of aircraft. Flight telemetry and climb rates suggested these jets were struggling to gain energy. Operating from a ski jump carrier like the Shandong imposes inherent limits. The fighters left the deck with reduced fuel and lighter weapons loads to clear the ramp. As they fought to climb and build energy, they burned precious fuel reserves just to reach a viable engagement altitude, a tactical handicap that would define the coming air exchanges. Simultaneously, acoustic operators below decks added a worrying layer. A Type 0339 diesel-electric submarine had been detected some 80 nautical miles away, emitting an unusually loud signature. The contact's noise profile, described by sonar teams as freight train loud, indicated a boat operating noisily and recklessly, either inexperienced or deliberately aggressive. A quiet, stealthy submarine would never broadcast its presence like that. The contact completed a rudimentary three-point box around the Nimitz group: carrier to the northwest, a destroyer to the west, and a noisy sub slipping in from the southwest. Tactically, that geometry created potential cross-domain threat vectors. Operationally, it exposed coordination fragility. Analysts in the strike group's CIC reached the same hard conclusion. China's approach was multi-domain, but technically immature. Surface ships, Type 052Ds, showed modern silhouettes, but dated systems in practice. Carrier aviation suffered energy and payload limits. The submarine force, at least in this instance, was loud and detectable. In short, the Chinese package was credible in intent, but uneven in capability. Bullying in posture, deficient in execution. At 0937, U.S. aviators observed the J-15s attempting to coordinate intercepts. The American response was surgical and methodical. Super Hornets launched in disciplined sequences. Deck crews on the USS Nimitz flowed through launch cycles with the practiced cadence of an aviator ecosystem. Within minutes, American FA-18s were ascending, their airborne radars sweeping for targets, while the carrier's battle network synchronized tracks across platforms. The disparity in avionics and data links became rapidly apparent. U.S. fighters, integrated via Link 16 and sharing sensor feeds across platforms, fought as a coherent, distributed sensor shooter system. A single detection propagated instantly across all cockpits. A single pilot's radar lock benefited the entire formation. The Chinese formation, by contrast, had to remain relatively bunched to maintain visual and short-range coordination, because its networking and situational awareness could not support dispersed operations. That forced pattern made them predictable, an operational liability against an opponent that could exploit distributed sensing. By 0943, the situation had reached a decisive technical inflection. American airborne electronic attack platforms, EA-18G Growlers, arrived in orbit and began to shape the electromagnetic battlefield. Their jamming profiles and expendable pods created confusion on Chinese displays. Radar plots multiplied into ghosts, tracks smeared, and command and control links began to fragment. What had been a clinic in intimidation degraded rapidly into electromagnetic chaos for the Chinese controllers. The J-15s, already fuel-stressed and bunched for cohesion, were now trying to fight in a sensor environment that increasingly looked like static. In under 10 minutes, the initial contact had moved from a potential coercive maneuver to a clear demonstration of tactical asymmetry. The Americans enjoyed superior networking, disciplined energy management, and electronic tools that hollowed out Chinese situational awareness. The Princeton's watchstanders and the Nimitz's air wing had, in a compressed timeline, converted detection into layered defense, and in doing so, had begun to impose costs on an adversary that had chosen posture over parity. At 09:43 hours, the skies above the South China Sea had turned into a live laboratory of 21st century warfare. The RC-135B rivet joint, orbiting 200 miles east of the Nimitz group, fed continuous intelligence to the strike network. Its array of electronic receivers cataloged every Chinese emission in exquisite detail, while onboard Mandarin linguists intercepted frantic radio chatter between the Shandong's air controllers and the J-15 pilots, now tangled in an invisible web of jamming and ghost contacts. Through the rivet joint's relay, a message reached the Nimitz Combat Direction Center that would almost be humorous if the situation weren't so grave. Dark Star confirms Chinese pilots requesting permission for aggressive maneuvers. Repeat, they're asking for clearance to buzz our ships. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. American aviators, trained to seize initiative under decentralized command, found the idea of enemy pilots waiting for bureaucratic approval mid-combat absurd. Every minute they hesitated only deepened their tactical disadvantage. Meanwhile, Princeton's Aegis combat system maintained unblinking focus on the incoming data. Her SPY-1B radar, capable of tracking a baseball-sized object at more than 160 miles, painted the Type 052D destroyer in brilliant clarity. Every few seconds, fire control solutions updated automatically. Bearing, speed, range, aspect, each variable refined to meter-level accuracy. The math was merciless. At current vectors, the Chinese ship would be inside Princeton's SM-6 surface engagement envelope within minutes. Then came the moment every watch officer trains for and hopes never to face. At 09:47 hours, the Chinese destroyer committed the single most provocative act short of opening fire. Its Type 346A phased array radar, which had been sweeping normally, abruptly ceased search mode and shifted to fire control illumination, locking onto the USS Nimitz with weapons-grade precision. In naval terms, it was the electronic equivalent of cocking a loaded pistol and pointing it at someone's face. Inside Princeton's CIC, alarms chirped softly. Status boards changed color. For half a heartbeat, the air seemed to hold its breath. Then the tactical action officer's voice cut through. Fire control quality track from hostile, bearing 270. Duration timer running. Instantly, the cruiser's own directors and missile batteries came to full readiness, yet the captain held his fire. American doctrine demanded discipline even under threat. The radar lock persisted exactly 30 seconds before dropping. Those 30 seconds spoke volumes. It was a staged display of aggression calibrated to provoke a reaction without triggering combat, an attempt to show resolve while counting on American restraint. Unfortunately for Beijing, that restraint was born not of fear, but of confidence. The US crew had every firing solution they needed. Had the Chinese illumination persisted a moment longer, the Princeton could have unleashed a storm of SM-6 and SM-2 interceptors that would erase the Jianchong from the tactical board in under 15 seconds. Throughout the event, American operators recorded every data point, frequencies, beam patterns, timestamps, knowing that such intelligence would prove invaluable in any future engagement. The professionalism in that compartment stood in stark contrast to the chaos on the Chinese side of the battle space, where comms degradation and fuel anxiety were beginning to unravel coordination. Above, one J-15 pilot decided to salvage pride through recklessness. He broke formation and executed a thump maneuver, a high-speed dive past an American FA-18E intended to intimidate. The U.S. pilot, a Top Gun graduate, reacted with reflexive precision. Rolling inverted, he pulled into the J-15's 6 o'clock position, his helmet-mounted sight painting a perfect lock on the Chinese jet's glowing exhaust. For 3 long seconds, he had a kill-quality firing solution, an AIM-9X Sidewinder cueing directly on the target. But the trigger remained untouched. Professionalism triumphed over impulse. The maneuver ended as quickly as it began, leaving the Chinese pilot shaken and low on fuel. Below the surface, another drama unfolded. At 0951 hours, Princeton's SQQ-89 sonar suite picked up a sharp acoustic spike, a snorkel breach. The previously noisy Type 039 submarine had surfaced its mast to recharge batteries, completely exposing its position. The sonar operator's report was calm, but pointed. Subsurface contact, bearing 159, range 15,000 yards. Contact is snorkeling. Probable Type 039. The CIC fell silent for half a beat. Everyone understood what that meant. The Chinese submarine commander either didn't realize or didn't care that he had been tracked for the past hour. Princeton had his acoustic signature cataloged and firing solutions ready. Had hostilities commenced, the cruiser's ASROC, anti-submarine rocket, would have delivered a torpedo to his exact coordinates within 12 seconds. The Chinese vessel, like its counterparts above, was operating in an environment it did not control, shadowed by forces it could not detect. The tactical tableau was now complete. A destroyer flashing its guns electronically, a carrier wing flailing under jamming, and a submarine betraying itself through sheer inexperience. What Beijing had envisioned as a show of strength had degenerated into an inadvertent exhibition of weakness, watched, recorded, and analyzed in real time by the most capable Navy on Earth. By 1430 hours, the United States Navy decided that diplomacy had been demonstrated sufficiently. It was time to remind Beijing, and anyone else listening, what real power projection looked like. With a low, thunderous rumble that rolled across the Pacific like distant artillery, the USS Nimitz began launching aircraft in a sequence that naval aviators referred to as the Storm. For the first time in years, the entire air wing came alive. 48 aircraft, FA-18EF Super Hornets, EA-18G Growlers, and E-2D Hawkeyes roared down the catapults in synchronized precision. Steam geysers burst skyward as deck handlers guided fighters into the sky at 45-second intervals, a rhythm that looked chaotic to outsiders, but was, in reality, the epitome of orchestrated discipline. To any observer, it was a spectacle of industrial strength and human mastery, the kind of operation no other Navy on Earth could replicate. The Growlers went up first. Their role was invisible but devastating: establish electromagnetic dominance. Within minutes, their ALQ-99 jamming pods began emitting full-spectrum interference, sweeping through the frequencies the Chinese fleet depended on for coordination. To the operators aboard the carrier Shandong, the radar screens erupted into madness. Ghost contacts multiplied by the hundreds. Genuine aircraft disappeared into static. What had been a coherent tactical picture moments earlier devolved into a storm of false returns and flickering traces. Chinese controllers shouted over garbled channels. Targets appeared and vanished at random. Every few seconds, systems rebooted automatically in futile attempts to re-establish clarity. It was like trying to fight blindfolded in a hall of mirrors. The Americans, by contrast, saw everything. The E-2D Hawkeye, orbiting high above, fused radar, infrared, and signals data into a single living map. Every ship, every aircraft, every emission cataloged and distributed via Link 16. Each pilot in the air wing had the same picture the same data, the same awareness. It was modern networked warfare at its peak efficiency. On the Chinese side, the J-15 pilots began to realize the scale of their disadvantage. Already fuel-starved from short, underpowered ski jump launches, they now found themselves flying through a cloud of electronic ghosts. Every radar lock they attempted fell apart. Every missile queuing system cycled aimlessly through phantom targets. American fighters appeared to multiply and merge. 4 became 12. 12 became 20. Until even seasoned Chinese aviators couldn't tell what was real. Meanwhile, below the surface, another act of quiet dominance unfolded. For 8 days, a Virginia-class attack submarine had been shadowing the Chinese formation, recording, observing, and remaining undetected. It had tracked the Shandong carrier group across hundreds of miles without ever being noticed. A ghost beneath the waves. At 15:47 hours, in a move designed not for combat, but for psychology, the submarine's commander issued an unprecedented order. Surface for effect. 6 nautical miles from the Shandong, the ocean erupted. The black hull of a 7,900-ton American submarine broke the surface in a roar of white foam and cascading seawater. Chinese lookouts froze. For the first time, they could physically see the invisible predator that had been following them, the single platform capable of destroying their carrier before they even knew it was there. For 90 seconds, the submarine remained surfaced, basking in the afternoon sunlight, its American flag visible through binoculars on every Chinese ship. Photographers aboard the Chinese vessels captured the moment, proof that their entire anti-submarine warfare network, their helicopters, sonar buoys, and surface escorts, had failed. Then, just as silently as it had appeared, the submarine slid back beneath the surface, vanishing like a shadow. The message was unmistakable. We own the undersea domain. In less than half an hour, the U.S. Navy had executed a flawless display of cross-domain supremacy, electronic, aerial, and subsurface, without firing a single shot. It was power as deterrence, dominance through composure. And in Beijing's war rooms, as satellite images of the surfacing submarine arrived, the mood shifted from defiance to humiliation. What had begun as an attempt to intimidate an American carrier group had transformed into a textbook case study in how technological inferiority and rigid command structures crumble under pressure. The Americans hadn't fired because they didn't need to. Their control of the battle space was absolute. By 1623 hours, the confrontation in the South China Sea was effectively over, though no official statement would ever admit it as such. On the surface, both sides disengaged without a shot fired. Beneath that veneer, however, one navy had emerged humbled, the other reaffirmed as the undisputed master of blue water warfare. The People's Liberation Army Navy, PLAN, had set out that morning to project confidence, to challenge U.S. presence in what Beijing calls its near seas. Instead, its carrier strike group was now in quiet retreat, crawling northwest toward the Chinese coastline under the polite fiction of completing scheduled exercises. But everyone in the region, and every intelligence analyst watching from Washington to Tokyo, knew the truth. China had blinked. The Shandong, flagship of China's ambitions, was limping home with her air wing exhausted and her communications disrupted. The J-15 pilots, drained by the earlier intercepts and burned through their fuel reserves, had returned to deck operations on fumes. Some landed with warning lights blinking. The dreaded bingo fuel indicator pilots hoped never to see outside simulators. They had faced the world's most experienced naval aviators and learned firsthand what that meant. Over open channels, U.S. aircraft maintained professional spacing, ensuring there could be no accusation of harassment. The Super Hornets executed combat air patrols with machine-like precision, refueling seamlessly, monitoring every Chinese course correction. Meanwhile, the EA-18G Growlers continued to saturate the electromagnetic spectrum, ensuring that the Chinese fleet's situational awareness remained degraded even during withdrawal. The USS Nimitz held position, flanked by her escorting destroyers Princeton, Chunghoon, and Kidd. Within her combat direction center, the atmosphere was calm, almost clinical. The operation had been a perfect rehearsal for modern maritime deterrence. Every radar emission, sonar ping, and jamming waveform was recorded and analyzed. Data packets were already en route to the Pacific Fleet's analysis centers in Pearl Harbor and San Diego, where specialists would extract signatures, refine countermeasures, and feed everything learned into the next evolution of fleet doctrine. What the Chinese intended as a coercive theater had instead become an intelligence bonanza for the United States. Each radar lock, each transmission from the Shandong, each sonar return from the Type 039 submarine, all were priceless insights into Chinese capabilities, tactics, and weaknesses. Above the ocean, the late afternoon sun caught the vapor trails of American aircraft orbiting in perfect formation. Below, the waters calmed, concealing once more the Virginia-class submarine that had briefly surfaced to send its message. That vessel was now resuming its silent patrol, tracking the retreating Chinese group from a comfortable distance, unseen, unheard, untouchable. Across the strike group, sailors and officers alike understood the significance of what they'd just executed. It wasn't just a tactical victory. It was a demonstration of composure under pressure, a masterclass in how restraint amplifies power. The U.S. Navy had proven that dominance need not roar. Sometimes it only needed to exist, visibly, unflinchingly, immovably. By 1700 hours, international maritime tracking systems registered the Chinese vessels turning northward, exiting contested waters. Commercial traffic resumed its normal rhythm. The same merchant ships that had been potential collateral in a superpower confrontation, tankers, container carriers, bulk freighters, sailed on in safety, under the unspoken protection of an American strike group that had turned potential war into calculated deterrence. In Beijing, the official narrative would be one of success, routine training, safe completion, normal maritime operations. In Washington, no victory parade or statement would follow. The Pentagon would quietly log the incident as South China Sea Freedom of Navigation Patrol, June 2025, completed without incident. But within the corridors of the U.S. 7th Fleet, the message was already clear and would echo in every strategic briefing that followed. When you challenge the U.S. Navy in open water, you don't get a standoff. You get a lesson. The South China Sea that day remained what it had been for decades. Not a disputed zone, not a gray area of influence, but a highway of global commerce, safeguarded by the steady, unflinching presence of the American flag. And as the horizon swallowed the last Chinese radar echoes, the radio silence across the strike group was broken by a brief, almost casual transmission from the Princeton's Combat Information Center. Threat neutralized, freedom of navigation maintained, standing by for next patrol. The sea rolled on, indifferent, endless, but the world had just been reminded who ruled it.